My girlfriend and I are the adventurous type. We love to go out of the house as much as possible, doing literally whatever outdoor activity we can do. This time, we decided late in the day that we wanted to go camping for around a week. Neither of us have the typical job where your hours are set. And the best way I can explain it is that we basically work for ourselves when it comes to our scheduling. But in the grand scheme of things, we worked for a larger company. We packed our bags and headed towards the camp's site. It's a state park where you can camp for free for up to 14 days without permits or approval needed. We were driving along a dirt road for a while, and I made the horrible mistake of not turning on my high beams. I don't know why, it was something I hadn't thought of doing. And it would prove to be something that I'd regret for the rest of my life. It didn't help that I was also going way too fast for the terrain and time of night. Within a split second, my girlfriend screamed, and only feet in front of the truck. We both saw a large downed tree in the middle of the road. There was little I could do other than slam on the brakes and hope that we could stop before hitting the tree. Of course, we weren't that lucky. We crashed into the tree, and I was out for a couple of seconds. I remember waking up really groggy, and the ringing in my ears was very intense. But my main priority was making sure that my girlfriend was okay. For purposes of streamlining the story, I'll just call her Jessica. I looked over at Jessica, and she was completely out. It was dark, but the moon was letting up her face enough for me to see that her eyes were closed. I yelled her name to try to wake her up. But she wasn't responding to it at all. I took my phone out of my pocket and turned on the flashlight and pointed it at her. I didn't really know what to expect. But what I saw was something I definitely would not be able to predict at all. I saw the blood first. She was wearing a white shirt, so it was pretty apparent. And then, of course, I noticed the tree branch puncturing through her chest. It wasn't a huge branch, it was probably the same circumference of maybe like a finger or something. I know that's kind of a strange comparison. But I literally can't think of anything else to compare it to. I had to come through the windshield, and it was still attached to the tree. I didn't want to shake her because I didn't want to cause any more trauma to her body in the process of trying to wake her up. So I just didn't touch her at all. I tried calling 911. But there was no service. I started trying to think of what I could do to help her, but there were so few options, the truck wouldn't even start. So even if driving away was the right idea, it wasn't an option. I had a knife in my pocket. So the next logical solution in my mind was to cut the branch from the tree and try to get her out of the truck and lay her down on the side of the road so I could get help, knowing someone wasn't going to crash into our truck and only make things worse. I hopped onto the hood of the car and tried so hard to cut that branch. But the knife was small and I was getting nowhere with it. I started to panic. It had already been over 30 minutes and she still hadn't woken up. I got back into the truck and I just started to pray. And that was weird for me since I hadn't prayed since I was a kid. But at this point, I was willing to try anything. They felt like I was praying for hours, but only another 30 minutes had passed. I was only holding on to this glimmer of hope because she wasn't actively bleeding during that 1 hour. The branch wasn't in the center of her chest. So I was hoping that it missed her heart. I felt her pulse, and it wasn't strong, but it was still there. All we could do was wait for someone to hopefully come along and help us. I don't know if it was God, her luck. But I started to see light coming from behind us. It filled the inside of the truck, and I got out as fast as possible and started screaming and waving at the driver. He stopped right behind her truck and rolled down his window and asked what was wrong. I started explaining to him fast, and he told me to slow down since he couldn't understand me. I explained slower and the expression on his face changed instantly. When he realized what I was saying, he got out of his truck and went over to the passenger side door with his flashlight and shined it on Jessica. I heard him curse under his breath and told me that the only hope that she had would be to cut the branch and try to drive her down the mountain to the EMT station since he also had no service. He had a chainsaw on the back of his truck, and I was terrified the shaking of the branch would hurt her even more, but there really was no other choice. He started sawing about a foot in front of her chest. I covered her with a blanket to try to minimize any sawdust from getting in the wound. It did vibrate her body a little bit, but she wasn't conscious. So at least she wasn't in pain. So I thought finally she was free from the tree. The man helped me pick her up as gently as possible, and we placed her in the back seat of his truck laying down. I got into the passenger side, and the man turned around and began driving down the mountain. Jessica stayed unconscious the whole time. It took us 20 minutes to get to the EMT station that I didn't even know was there. They were surprised to see us, since usually they get called to emergencies. They loaded her into an ambulance and I got in with her, and the nearest hospital wasn't too far away, thank God, but it wasn't a trauma center, so she had to be airlifted to the bigger city that was around an hour away by helicopter. She had a punctured lung. But thankfully she hadn't lost much blood and her heart wasn't damaged at all. The doctor said that, if it had been only an inch to the left, it would have pierced to her heart. And she probably would have died within minutes after the accident. She stayed in a coma for almost 2 weeks. And when she eventually woke up, she could barely speak because of the pain that she felt in her chest. She stayed in the hospital for over 2 months. She had intensive surgery to try to repair all the damage, but it's possible that she might even need a transplant for her lung in the future. I'm just grateful Jessica survived and have stayed in touch with the man who saved her life. Jessica has currently stolen oxygen and has trouble breathing from time to time. I take her to monthly appointments, and we're doing everything we can to hopefully, someday see her fully recover. Although we have come to terms with the fact that that may never happen. I asked her to marry me while she was still in the hospital. And she said yes, and no matter what happens, I'm looking forward to spending the rest of our lives together. I'll never forget that night. And oftentimes, I struggle to forgive myself for what happened. But I'm also glad it's something that she doesn't have to remember. In this specific incident occurred, I was 29 years old and driving a relatively short distance with my 5-year-old daughter. My husband and I had made plans to drive to his parents' house outside the city and stay with them for a couple of weeks. My husband works late into the day. So we agreed that it would be better to find my daughter left first. And my husband would follow a couple of hours after us. It was winter, so it got dark early. We left at around 3 p.m. And by 4:30, was already completely dark outside. We were still an hour and a half from my in-laws' house. And I was feeling pretty confident that we'd get there without anything bad happening. It's not like I had a feeling or anything. But as a mother, it's definitely something I thought about in the back of my mind. We were driving back down a back road that had no streetlights and was otherwise completely desolate. I didn't necessarily love the feeling of being completely alone. But I tried my best to just brush it off and kept telling myself that we'd be there before I knew it. We'd driven this road countless times before and never had anything happen to us. We were 30 minutes from the house when I started seeing some flashing lights in the distance. They were 2 blinking yellow lights in the middle of the road that I quickly recognized as hazard lights on a car. I started getting this nasty feeling and just didn't like the fact that they weren't pulled over to the side of the road, but instead, or in the middle of it. I stopped somewhere between 80 and 100 feet away and started thinking of what I should do. I was sure of one thing, though, there was no way that I was stopping to help these people. I mean, I was a woman in her late 20s alone with her young daughter. I'd have to be a raging lunatic to stop to help anyone. I'd call to get them help later. But that's the best I could really do. I'm sure any other woman in my position would feel the same way. You have to put you and your child's safety first before a stranger always. I sat there for what felt like 30 minutes and still had no idea what to do. I had no service. So calling my husband or father-in-law was not an option. I finally made the decision to just turn around and go home and wait for my husband so we could drive there together. The only problem was that it was a 2-lane road. And it would take more than a 3-point turn for me to turn around and start heading back. I started to hesitate. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I noticed some shadows running up quickly in the distance behind my car. I could see them slightly in the moonlight. But I couldn't make out what they were. They had gotten around 30-ish feet behind my car when I realized that they were people. And I think they were carrying something. I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't even think. It was like my body reacted before my brain did. I put the car in drive in Florida. It wasn't a crazy fast car or anything. But it did what I needed it to do. I was speeding right towards the stop car and had no choice but to drive onto the side of the road, past them as best I could. As I passed, I saw more people started to come out from the side of the road. They started throwing things, pretty much anything they could get me to stop. I sideswiped one of the people and they fell back onto the road. Something hit my windshield and even shattered a little bit. And whatever it was went flying into the passenger seat. I screamed from the impact and felt bad because my screaming made my daughter began to scream and cry, and I told her everything was going to be okay. But she was 5. And nothing I could say at the time was going to make her feel any better. I just kept driving forward, not letting up on the gas. I was trying to build as much distance as possible between us and those people. And before I knew it, we were pulling up into my in-law street. They had a guard gate in the front and I pushed the button to be let in. And they immediately could tell that I was in distress when they answered the gate. We were let in and my father-in-law met me at the driveway with his gun. I was bawling. And my daughter was sobbing into her grandma's shoulder, the Broderson side, and I told them everything that had happened. My father-in-law has always been very protective of me and my daughter, and I could tell how angry he was getting. He kept asking me if they had followed us here, and honestly, I had no idea. I hadn't been paying attention to the cars behind me. I just was focused on getting to their house where I knew we'd be safe. My in-laws are the kind of people that are very serious about their security. They have countless firearms and security cameras everywhere around and inside their house and property. They check the cameras and notice the same car passing by the front gate over and over. He was driving down the street, turning around and coming back multiple times. We decided it was time to call the police. But when they did, they said that they couldn't do anything for us since it wasn't technically an emergency. And it was so far outside their city limits. I guess when you live far enough outside the boundaries of where the local police typically serve, they can only help in life or death situations. My dad very explicitly told them that if anyone entered their property, they would be shot on sight. They told him it was within his rights. And that was it. He armed me and my mother-in-law and told us to wait inside the house. He called my husband, who was still an hour away, and went outside to check the property. We watched the security cameras. And just as he was approaching the gate, the car pulled up again. But this time it stopped right at the gate. 2 people got out of the car, and they clearly hadn't spotted my father-in-law walking up to the gate. They tried pushing it open. And because we couldn't hear what was going on, all we saw was my father-in-law run up to them and fire a shot in the air. We could tell he was screaming something at them. But we didn't know what. They scrambled back into the car and sped off quickly. We weren't sure if they'd be back. But I had a feeling that that was the end of it. My husband got to the house an hour later and kept continuously apologizing to me for having to drive alone. But I kept telling him that it wasn't his fault. And the outcome would have been the same if he was with us. We were safe. And that's what mattered. A couple of days later, we heard the news that there had been a few carjackings in the area. But thankfully, no one was seriously injured in the process. I still hate to think about what would have happened if I hadn't seen those people sneaking up on us behind the car. What would they have done? I don't even want to know. I'm grateful we're okay. And I will say that I don't drive anywhere at night without protection, whether that be my husband or a gun. So I've come to find that dating online can be crazy. Let me just say that before I say anything else. You see pictures of someone online, talk for a while, and then meet them, not even knowing for sure that they're the person in the picture. It's really absolutely insane. I only wish that I knew that before downloading Tinder myself. I had gone on a few dates with guys that I met on Tinder, but nothing ever worked out. Most guys just wanted hookups or aren't ready for commitment. Of course, there are also some creeps, but I didn't come across those types too often. After having Tinder for a few months, I met a guy on the app who seemed way too good to be true. He was absolutely gorgeous. And when he messaged me, I was so excited. I got even more excited the more we talked when I realized that we had so much in common. He was so nice and funny. And from what he told me about himself, he really seemed like my dream guy. You know, after around a week of talking, he asked if I wanted to hang out. I suggested the bar near my house, but he wanted to go to dinner instead. I usually like to get drinks on the first date, so I could leave quickly if it went bad. But I liked this guy so much. And he seemed different. So I agreed to dinner. For purposes of anonymity, we'll just call him Oliver. Now I was just going to drive to the restaurant myself, but he insisted on picking me up, saying it was the gentleman's thing to do, and so on and so forth. It wasn't the best idea to say yes, but I guess I'm not as smart as I think I am, because I agreed and I gave him my address. He said he picked me up around 7 p.m. the next day, and man, I was really happy. I told all my friends where we were going, and they told me that I was an idiot for giving a guy I'd never met my address. I thought that they were all just being jealous. So I didn't take their comments to heart. I started getting ready around 6 and did exactly 7, my doorbell rang. I opened the door and immediately was disappointed by what I saw. He looked nothing like his pictures. Well, not nothing like them. It was obviously the same person, but at least 10 or 15 years older. I didn't say anything. And I figured that I'd go on the dates and see how it went, because I did still like his personality over text at least. He opened the door for me and walked around to the other side and got in. We started driving in the direction of the restaurant, and that was around 30 minutes away. He told me how gorgeous he thought I was, and that I was even prettier than my pictures. And then very awkwardly, he said, "What about me? Am I even more handsome than my pictures?" At first, I thought he was joking. He had to be right. There was no way that he didn't know that he was much more unattractive than whenever he took those pictures. I really didn't know what to say. But my mom has always told me to be honest. So I decided a half-truth was better than nothing. I said he looked good. But then it was curious how long ago he had taken those pictures. It was immediately obvious he took offense to the question. So I quickly apologized and told him to forget I ever asked, and was hoping we could move on from that. But he clearly took it very personally and proceeded to give me the silent treatment for the next 5 minutes, like some big baby. I had really begun to regret the decision to go out with him, and definitely regretted giving him my address. I knew the way to the restaurants. So I was keeping track where we were going as he drove. I noticed that he missed the turn on the street where it was located. And I told him to just do a U-turn at the next intersection. But he didn't respond. He passed the next intersection, and I started to get a little freaked out. I told him again that he needed to turn around, and again, I got no response. He drove along the road, and I asked him over and over what he was doing and where we were going, but he refused to even look at me. We stopped at the red lights, and I knew that I just had to get out of that car and went to open the door. But I saw that it was locked. There was no button to unlock it, and it was one of those locks that retracted inside the door, so I couldn't even manually do it myself. I was trapped. I took my phone out as discreetly as possible. I texted my friend my location. After driving for some time, Oliver pulled into an empty parking lot outside a grocery store. He parked in a spot on the far end of the lot. I didn't know exactly what he planned to do, but I had an idea that I was not at all about to let that happen. He took off his seat belts, and I reached in my purse. He grabbed my arms and tried pinning me down. I fought back against him and tried as hard as I could to keep them off of me. Finally, he let go of my arm and I pulled out my pepper spray and I sprayed him directly in the face. The only problem was with using pepper spray in such a confined space. He ended up getting it on yourself as well. My eyes immediately began to burn and water as he screamed in the seat beside me. He started calling me every name in the book as he tried wiping his face with a shirt. And during the struggle, I was able to reach over to him and unlock the doors. I shoved it open. I fell out into the ground, scraping my knees in the process. By that point, I was having trouble seeing clearly and my chest had begun to burn from breathing in the fumes from the pepper spray. I tried standing, but was so dizzy. I kept falling back to the ground. I stumbled as I slowly made my way across the lot. I heard his door open and him yelling at me to come back over. I looked back and through all the blurriness and tears I saw him tripping over himself as he followed me. I screamed for help. But no one was around to hear my cries. Oliver started to say that he was just joking and that he didn't mean to freak me out. He said if I just came back to the car with him we'd go to the restaurant as planned and that he was sorry. And he says this in between screams of pain from his eyes burning. It was terrifying. And I genuinely wondered if he thought that it was actually going to believe him and go back to the car with him. Is he really that stupid? He was close behind me within no time. And just as I reached the doors of the grocery store, he grabbed me by the shoulders and yanked me back. But the doors had already opened and I screamed for my life. I saw a man came running out and told Oliver to get off of me, which he then did immediately. And the man helped me up and tried to keep Oliver there. But there was no stopping him from getting back in his car and driving away. The police were called in that moment and they told me that they'd opened an investigation. But nothing ever came with it. And believe it or not, this guy was never found. I moved out of that house that I was living in at the time and just moved back in with my parents. I started to get really paranoid for a while that he would find me, but it still hasn't happened. I use my story now as a cautionary tale for other women going down the same path that I once was. Even you men out there. You never know who wants to hurt you. But it can and does happen. So please be careful.